Good afternoon. I hope none of you are overindulged at lunch, because to get the best possible use of this presentation will require very close attention. The original work on location theory is accredited to von Thünen, a North German academic with practical experience as a farmer, and he died in 1850. For the next 100 years it was developed in North America, and in the end Professor Harris was giving very accurate advice to North American businesses as to where to position themselves for maximum revenue at minimum cost. A visiting professor from the UK, Professor Colin Clark, picked up these ideas and developed them, which made him the ideal candidate when Harold Wilson wanted a big project done to determine what would be the effect on UK industry of joining the EEC. All this was done in the late 1960s, but the peripherality considerations, which would help if you saw the next chart. Peripherality considerations help do that, bring it up to date. So what was this paper? It considered the original 6 members of the EEC plus the 4 candidate countries and divided them into 103 regions. And for each region, the economic potential of that region was assessed by means of calculating the income in that region, and then for any particular region, the transport costs for getting a 10-ton load to and from that every other region was calculated. So the cost was how to get your goods to all the potential markets in these 103 regions. There was a fixed cost for handling, and then the road, rail and sea transport were included, but not canals. And finally, there was an allowance made for trade with the rest of the world, and of course for the pre-EEC case there were tariffs involved. So when he calculated the economic potentials for each of these 103 regions, they were rounded to a 200 unit spacing and lines of equal potential drawn on the map of Europe called isotyms. And the first map is the pre-EEC case. And the numbers are relative, not absolute, and the largest is best. And you see that West Germany, France and the UK all contain a well-defined core region with potentials over 2,800. And these potentials decrease as you move away from the main areas. It's notable that Belgium, Holland and Luxembourg have low potential, and southern Italy, Northern Ireland and Northern Scotland have potentials less than half of the maximum, though that's not shown on this particular map. The trend towards them is. So pre-EEC, fairly even playing field. When the EEC was formed, without the UK or the other 3, the EEC now shows a single core with greatly increased potential, 3,600, and to a lesser extent, improvements all around the community. However, it's worth noting that southern Italy and southern France have declined in relative terms with respect to the large area of high potential that now exists in Germany and part of Holland. And the greatest changes in potential have taken place in Benelux countries, with an increase in potential of over 50%. The absolute values in the UK have hardly changed at all, but our position relative to this new, very high potential core in Europe has reduced dramatically. And it's worth noting the enhanced potential of the Benelux countries signalled the decline of the port of London and the start of the growth of Rotterdam and Antwerp. So we haven't changed much, but the centre of Europe has grown enormously. Then we join. And map 3 predicts the change in economic potentials due to the EEC including Britain, Eire, Denmark and Norway, though Norway did not ultimately join. And the UK gains a little, but the major effect is a big expansion on the area of high potential in the centre. So the message from that is that Europe gains quite a lot from the UK joining, but it doesn't make a lot of difference to the UK. Colin Clark's prediction was that labour and capital would migrate to the areas of highest potential, which would be steadily enriched, and the periphery correspondingly impoverished. This was cross-checked against employment figures, and it was seen that this was indeed the case. So what does this mean in hard numbers for our manufacturers? So here's an example. If you look at map 1, prior to the formation of the EEC, UK and Germany are roughly equal. If you then look at map 3, the relative changes show that, assuming equal skill and effort are employed in each country, the remuneration in the UK has increased by 8%, whilst that in Germany has gone up by 36%. Assuming costs are 50% and constant, and labour takes 25%, then the increase in profit and wages in the UK will have gone up by 12% and 4%, whilst in Germany, corresponding increases are 54% and 18%. Over many years, this provides Germany with a level of profit that would support a strong government and infrastructure investment and enable manufacturing industry to use the latest machinery. And a quick check on that, the labour cost per unit output from 2000 to 2009 was flat in Germany, whilst in Italy and Spain it went up by 30%. Thus, goods produced in Germany are extremely good value, and sales to Germany's European neighbours accounted for 75% of Germany's export success. A more current example is the car industry. Between 2000 and 2013, production in Western Europe fell by 29%. And in Germany, it increased by 10%, and profits doubled. In the more peripheral countries, there is a corresponding loss of manufacturing jobs, thus lower tax revenues for the government and more unemployed people to feed. Personal and public borrowing from Germany then increased to buy German goods. Clearly not a sustainable solution. So if you look at what this analysis led Ronald Burgess to say we should do way back in the 80s, he said, well, we must acknowledge this huge area of high economic potential right next door to us. And the way to get to it is to build top-class transport links from our manufacturing, most of which is north of Birmingham, to the East Coast ports. Develop roll-on, roll-off and container ports, and then don't build a channel tunnel, because all that does is give European manufacturers direct access to our biggest market, whereas for our manufacturers to get to it, they have to go right past and through London, and it's very slow and expensive. But if you did build one, we should build up the East Coast freight lines that Keith Gerry recommended that bypass London. He also said on the basis of this we should be able to negotiate some refunds from the EU, and as he was advisor to Sir Keith Joseph, maybe he had a hand in Margaret Thatcher's successful campaign. He also said it goes against the grain. If we increase VAT to the maximum, VAT is payable on imports but not on export. It gives our exporters a 20% advantage, and reduce taxes on industry as fast as possible. Ultimately, we would hope to have no tax on productive effort. That would be the ideal which we share with many brother organisations. We should never join the euro, though it wasn't really contemplated then. I did that. And we should look at our options outside Europe. And most of our most successful businesses are in fact global. So, a quick word about the euro, though I can say very little about this compared with what's possible. Before the establishment of the euro, each nation state managed its own currency. They could set their own interest rates, moderate their own money supply, and step in if the market set exchange rate was deemed too disadvantageous. In this era, the centrally located nation's huge advantage, in particular Germany, was corrected from time to time by devaluation. And in fact, what happened was the D-mark was revalued a number of times, and the national government's local issues could be addressed with the fiscal and monetary tools available. Once the euro was established, the international exchange rate and the interest rates were set by the stronger economic countries and the European Central Bank. The cost of borrowing was uniform across both strong and weak economies. And as the competitiveness of the peripheral nations started to decline, the traditional exchange rate correction was not available, nor the variation of interest rates to control borrowing, nor the ability to change the reserve ratio to change the amount of money available in the economy. So, after a honeymoon period, the locationally disadvantaged nations started to experience a sharp reduction in creative activity, closure of companies, increasing unemployment, and a huge increase in personal and public debt, which came to roost terribly in 2008. So that's the euro. We were very lucky that we did enjoy. Well, that would have been our fate too. Now we come to a new concept. This brings the whole thing up to date. Since the early 1980s, there have been over 20 studies funded by the Commission to discover the most disadvantaged, i.e. peripheral, regions in the EU. This is to be fed into the Trans-European Transport Networks Plan, TETM, as there is a view that the disadvantage is due to geographic location, and improved transport to the economic epicentre will reduce this disadvantage. And the latest study to come my way was headed by a gentleman called Tellat and was presented to the Commission in 2002. Tellat's method was to calculate economic potential, and then the lowest score has the greatest peripherality, comes out on top, i.e. in need of most help. In his calculation, the 15 existing members and the 12 potential members were included, and the calculations were very, very detailed. There are 4 sizes of region used by the Commission, known as Nomenclature of Territorial Units for Statistics, NUTS for short, and they are 0 to 3, where 0 is a nation state and 3 the most detailed, which in the UK would be roughly equivalent to counties. And Tellat used the finest granularity. So how did he calculate economic potential? It looks very much like Colin Clark's work. He looks at economic mass and divides it by travel time, where economic mass is generally taken as GDP, though sometimes modified by employment and population due to lack of reliable statistics from some of the countries. Travel time was road-based, calculated separately for cars and lorries, and paying heed to speed limits, constraints such as mountains, urban areas, sea journeys and statutory rest periods. There are no tariff considerations, as this is strictly within the EU, but global trade does come in due to the use of GDP as the economic mass. If you remember, GDP expenditure method equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. So the exports are in there. And this is important when you look at how the UK fares. The author put a few words of warning in his report. Attempts to explain changes in economic indicators, i.e. economic growth and decline, by transport investment have been less successful, that is in generating indicators themselves. Improved accessibility is a threat as well as an opportunity. Of course, people ever centralising growing their industries need more markets. And as soon as you put in better transport, the big boys can get in there and wipe out the small ones who are there already. And that's happened a lot. And later on he says, enlargement improves the central region's advantage. There's quite a few warning shots there. Now, let's have a look at the results of his work. I only put one of them up. With pretty good eyes to see it. So the economic potential of every NUTS 3 region was calculated, averaged, and the average set at 100, and coloured yellow on the chart. So it's down. Oh, press the wrong thing again. No, I've lost it completely. This one? Right, get in there. Sorry about this. Finger trouble? There we go. Now, press the right button. Got it. So down here, it's the yellow, which is average. That number's 100. So, anything greater than average tends up towards green, and anything less than average tends towards red. So there's Colin Clark's predictions in red and green, vividly displayed. So now a large part of Germany has a potential of 2.75 times the average. Some of the peripheral regions have a potential of only 10% of the average. London and the southeast look good at 2.25 to 2.5, and Talat says that the Channel Tunnel now supports businesses in the UK. And it's worth noting that 1 million people have moved to the Eurostar corridor, mainly relocated UK businesses, small ones, but some fleeing over regulation in the continent. And this narrow corridor does include London. This also includes the UK's successful global businesses. If you note, Cornwall looks... Here we go again. I could go there. There. Right. Sorry about this.
Good revision.
Yes. Just, the buttons are too close together. Cornwall looks pretty bad. Ireland worse. North Scotland absolutely dire. It's also worth noting there's a ring of average potential around a huge area of massive potential in Germany, and after that everything else is sub-average. If you look across to Romania and Bulgaria, all of them are at less than 10%. Will immigration continue? Finally, quick summary. So the UK's economic potential is only marginally increased by membership of the EU. The potential of the EU is considerably increased by UK membership. Provided Germany does not make a catastrophic mess of its arrangements, it will always hold the purse strings and be in charge. To beat a German company working with the same skill and tools, a UK company in the southeast would have to be 40% more efficient or work 40% longer hours to beat a German company selling into the EU market. And other parts of the UK suffer an even greater disadvantage. Thus, it's not surprising that the UK's most successful businesses are global, not in EU markets. City, aerospace, armaments, biotech, creative industries, etc. The prediction that the peripheral countries will suffer deindustrialisation and a steady economic decline will continue despite building super transport networks, if they ever happen. There have been 20 plans and no actual action. And the euro makes this situation much, much worse by locking the disadvantage in. One solution would be a locational levy proportional to the advantage that a particular region enjoys. But of course we've got that in the UK to some extent, and the bureaucracy, mistakes and ill feeling it causes, I think there's very little chance of it occurring amongst a group of 28 nations who have to agree on how all this will work. And it doesn't work very well in the UK either. So how that's going to happen, I don't know, but it is the ideal solution. There's lots of people working very hard on how to make something of this nature a practical proposition. All our economic policies should recognise this huge area of high economic potential next door. I say, and just as a little footnote, Scotland has such a low economic potential that if they ever separated from the UK, they'd have to play an economic blinder just to survive. I leave it at that. Thank you very much.